it's important that this takes place before your patient comes in. For that reason, you want to make sure that in managing your patient's expectations, that you have also thought about telling them that results will not be in for 4 to 6 weeks, that you will get the information back and will have a chance to review that information. If at that point you share with your patient that GeneSNPs are read on Tuesday, and therefore they can expect to have someone from the office call to schedule for the report of findings after you've read them, that's reasonable. That's a reasonable step to take. Managing expectations, I would say, is one of the more important skills that we have to learn as practitioners. It's important for that our patients know what to expect from the GeneSNP DNA analysis. It is not a diagnostic test. The test is one that can give them insight into factors of health that they haven't paid attention to before or don't know that they need to pay attention to. They should know that the information that they get will recommend supplementation, dietary change, and sleep changes. So I think it's important that not only do you have enough time to read the report before the patient comes in, but that you also share with the patient that the report will need to be further developed by you. It takes 4 to 6 weeks to come in, that on a certain day perhaps you read genetic analysis reports, you develop a treatment plan for the patient based on the information that they've shared with you and based on what we see in their genetic analysis, paired with lab results that maybe you have done at the same time. It is possible to do a very comprehensive wellness visit using hormone panels if that's the type of practice that or the type of tools or services that you deliver to your patients. Not just genetic analysis, but also their annual lab work, for example, and that they'll expect something from your staff to call them and reschedule an appointment or schedule an appointment for them to go over all of these results. Don't get yourself into a bind leading the patient to believe that results come back quickly or that there won't be a need to come back and get information about the genetic analysis. The report is large enough that there's several points to have a conversation with your patient. This is probably not something that you're going to do over the phone. This is probably something that you will need to talk to them about the importance of coming back in for an additional visit to learn about their genetic analysis and get started with their program that has been dictated by the results of that genetic analysis and any other lab work that you choose. So we've filled in all of the information on our GeneSNP cheat sheet. I no longer need the patient guide. Now, the information that's in the patient guide is helpful for me when it comes to dialoguing with my patient, pulling out some of their hot buttons or things that they want more information, for example, exercise and fitness, obesity scales, and the like. There's good information in here, but from the clinician standpoint, we're really just going to use this cheat sheet now and the health practitioner guide. I don't have any need at this point for the product compendium. Right now, I just want to see how many red, yellow, and green results my patient has. So just at a glance, because of the way we made the cheat sheet, I can go down and see that there's a larger portion of red alleles than yellow or green alleles. From page to page, I may find that that number changes. On the second page, I have more neutral alleles than I do red alleles. And so I've got some sense here that at the end of the day, the majority of this GeneSNP report is neutral with a stronger leaning towards red and not green. So second runner-up are red alleles and less with the green. There are two guides that come in when it comes to the patient guide, or what I refer to as the patient guide. This is the report that comes from the lab. It will come in hard copy, mailed to the practitioner, two of them. One will be for you, the practitioner, one will be for the patient. You need it to interpret the information. You may choose at this point to write on it, to do whatever you would want to do to help trigger or lead you in the discussion. The patient will have a clean copy. It isn't necessary for you to give both copies to the patient, although some practitioners may choose to do that, because once you have the cheat sheet, you have the results. I don't recommend that you give away any of the results, or that you don't give away all of the results, because there isn't an archive of this, there isn't a download of this, there isn't a way for you to get another copy of this by logging into an account. So you want to make sure that you hold on to this in some way. Those of us that use our electronic medical records are simply going to break the binding, and we're going to scan this in as a file like we would with any of the lab results that we get using our EMRs. So from here, I'm going to take my cheat sheet. I've assessed quickly a sense of how many reds, greens, or yellows do I have, but this is where I now need to go through and learn a little bit about the strength of these genes or the concern that some of these genes have. This means I need another piece of paper to write down this. So if the first GeneSNP that I'm going to look at, based on the health practitioner guide, is the first gene in the behavior analysis, and I'll help define what I mean by behavior here. This may be overeating behavior. This may be a tendency towards anxiety behavior. This may be a concern with sleep habits and that type of behavior. In particular, this is a beneficial segment for GeneSNP analysis for practitioners that do a lot of work in anxiety, depression, ADD, or ADHD. This type of information is very helpful for children. One thing that is different with this GeneSNP analysis that was not common in previous GeneSNP analysis that we offered, and is not common in all GeneSNP or all genetic analyses that are available from competitors, is that this GeneSNP analysis can be done on someone younger than the age of 18, and it does give us great insight into mental emotional health and obesity factors in children. It gives us, when it comes to obesity, the ability to work early with the family to help with eating habits and unique interventions for obesity in the child, so that we can change gene behavior and stop obesity before it's manifested itself. When it's already manifested itself in a child, we're able to identify its unique triggers, its unique switch, as I like to say, and then take some steps towards dietary recruitment, sleep recruitment, a sense of mental well-being activities, as well as supplement activities that can change that gene environment and kind of flip that switch, even if obesity has already started in the child. The same would be true for concerns that we have with mental focus, cognitive function, as well as any concerns that we may have with sleep, anxiety, or other mental emotional components of adolescent and teenage years. So going here, my first behavior GeneSNP that I'm going to look at is BDNF. It tells me here that the risk allele is A, so I'm immediately going to look to see if my patient has the A allele. Where this becomes the back and forth is with the cheat sheet, because remember, the cheat sheet was made to be in the same order as the patient lab report, so that you could easily find the gene allele or the gene result. But at this point, because we made the clinical guide just that, a clinical guide, it is not in the same order as this test. So I'm now going to find the BDNF gene on my cheat sheet. Over time, this becomes easier to do. I'm able to find it by knowing that it's on the inside, for example, or it's on the back cover. So what I want to do is take the cheat sheet now. I've identified that there's more red on the front, that there's a lot of neutral genes um, throughout the middle of the report. But really now my most important step, now that I've kind of weighted the color of the GeneSNP analysis, is to go in or target or focus on the ones that I know to be problematic. I like to think of this as the genes that I don't want them to have. So let's just get that out of the way first and find out if my patient has an MTHR variant that is problematic, a COMT variant that is problematic. Do they have leptin sensitivity issues that put them at risk not just for obesity, but for blood sugar concerns as well as cardiovascular disease? How about the high blood pressure SNPs? Are those going to be a concern in my patient? I specifically look at FTO variants because they give me insight into female fertility, concerns that I have with fatty accumulation around the liver, and I always look at the methylation SNPs because those give me insight into mitochondrial function, energy metabolism, not just as it relates to weight management, but as it relates to age management. So these are the things I want to pay special attention to. The first gene SNP that I look for happens to be the first on the report, which is the FAME2 variant. This is a variant that gives me insight into cognitive brain function as we age, as well as into obesity factors where satiety signals are not turned off. Because this is a particular risk in mental emotional health, I look at this one a lot. In this case, it's a neutral gene. There's not a concern with overeating or a lack of satiety signals in this individual. I then go down and I look for the FTO variant. There is a problem with the FTO 609 variant, which means to me, if my patient's female, I may be concerned about factors related to not just obesity, but fat accumulation around the liver, exercise endurance, as well as cardiovascular health, in particular with exercise endurance. How responsive are they going to be to some of those lifestyle measures? Going through BDNF is one of the first genes I like to look at because the BDNF gene is a cognitive gene. The BDNF gene gives me insight into memory, cognitive function, brain aging, but it also happens to be a gene polymorphism that gives me insight into energy metabolism as well. This is a gene that is run really well off of caffeine. So one of the things that I like to do when I look through the genes, as well as to identify genes that have a lot of strength in the scientific literature for how we can change them, how we can move the way they behave or alter their gene environment. And caffeine, which is a common source of energy for many patients, the BDNF gene gives me insight into whether or not that is a good habit for them to have or not necessarily a good habit for them to have. In this case, it's a good habit for them to have. I look at any of the DRD2 genes. These are specifically blood sugar related genes. These are strong risk factors for type 2 diabetes when you look at the literature on the DRD2 genes. There are 3 of them in this GeneSNP analysis, all of them at different segments of the gene, all of them promoted or controlled potentially by either a different nutrient, an amount of a nutrient, or a protein. Many of the gene polymorphisms that we look at are responsive to diet or diet environment. The DRD2 genes are very responsive to lifestyle. So considering that on one hand, it can be gene expression for type 2 diabetes, it's nice to know that the solution is lifestyle, that the solution is dietary intake, and that supplementation may be the bridge between these two factors for individuals that may have a hard time changing their gene behavior. I bring these up because not all genes are strongly influenced by diet. Some genes are strongly influenced by sleep. And regardless of the health or quality of your diet, if you just get some good sleep, some of these genes will offset a bad diet. And so I think it's important to know when we're reading through the GeneSNP to know that some genes do have higher scientific strength than some of the other genes. So I may find myself looking at those as well. The adipaq genes are adiponectin genes, and these are ones that I'll always want to look at as well. In this case, we're neutral for the adiponectin gene. I want to go and find the other adiponectin gene that is in, and we're positive. So we're a neutral and we're a positive for adiponectin. I bring this up because this is a very, very powerful gene to look at, because not only is it an indication of cardiovascular performance today and in the future, it is also an indication of energy metabolism. It's an indication of health through blood sugar control. People that have very low adiponectin will struggle to lose weight, and they have significant risk factors in disorders that have a strong inflammatory component. So if adiponectin is high enough, or the GeneSNP does not turn on or dictate for low adiponectin levels, I can rule out or rule in, depending on the results, inflammatory markers, or rather inflammatory triggers for disease. Considering that inflammation is such a strong predictor for chronic disease today, knowing out of the gate if somebody has the adiponectin variant is really helpful for me to know how strong my focus needs to be on quenching that fire in the patient. I want to take a minute here to remind you that having the adiponectin variant here, or any of the variants here, but having them in a neutral position, let's say, does not mean that inflammation is not possible in your patient. Remember, there's a lot of other factors that play a role in health, lifestyle being a major player in that. You can't outrun a bad diet. You can't outsleep a bad diet. It is important that we appreciate that the GeneSNP information is just one facet of our treatment plan. Lifestyle changes are still absolutely necessary, even if your GeneSNP analysis tends to let you off the hook when it comes to things like caffeine and sugar. That's not an excuse to get your food out of a window. So I do look for the adiponectin genes. Running through a bunch of different scenarios here, I know that there are certain gene variations that are hot on everybody's list, like the MTHFR variant. So I first want to know if this individual has the MTHFR variant. They do, but they are not homozygous for the variant, which means this is not nearly the problem that it would be in someone that was homozygous, or TT for the gene polymorphism. So I know that this patient may have elevated factors like homocysteine, may have a sluggish enzyme, but they're not up against the wall with methylation. They will respond very well to 5-MTHFR, which is quatropholic, which is considered the gold standard in folic acid supplementation. But because they are not homozygous, I know that they would also be responsive to 4-formyl folinic acid. And that's important for me to know, as I want to discriminate between where I'm really going to set the bar for supplementation and the requirement for certain supplements over other supplements.